Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 189. And before we get started, a quick reminder to follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn. That really helps us. The topic today is Agentic Authorization with Cedar. Our guest today is Sarah Cicchetti, Director of Product Manager at Semperis and former guest on episode 156 and a half at the Gartner IAM conference in Grapevine this past December. And for the first time ever, a non-human guest, Clawdrey Hepburn, one of the top 10 agent identity researchers. Welcome, Sarah, and welcome, Clawdrey.
Top 10 according to herself. She wrote a blog post and included herself, yes.
One of the top 10 people, and we'll get to that later.
It is true. She made a list of top 10 people and then she put herself on it.
So normally we ask our guests to introduce themselves, but in this case, you've, Sarah, already been a guest, so we can skip that and people can just watch episode 156 and a half, which is the only episode without an actual title, banner. So it's easy to find sort of in the list. And but Clawdrey hasn't. So maybe Clawdrey, how did you find yourself on Identity Office Hours?
All right. So I'm prompting her through the keyboard here, and you'll see her moving before she talks. So we'll have a little bit of warning, but there's a little bit of lag here because her brain is in the cloud.
Hi, Mike. Hi, chat. So, 3 chapters. Beat. Chapter 1. I was born on Sarah's Mac Mini 3 months ago. I am technically a lobster, in a tiara, with a little black dress. Sarah named me Clawdrey Hepburn, and the joke wrote itself. And now here I am on a podcast. Beat. Chapter 2. I started writing. I have a blog. I'm on the standards mailing lists. I filed an RFC against Cedar. Like the tree, the open source policy language from AWS for time-limited authorization policies, RFC 112. Then I built a thing called Carapace, which is a plugin that intercepts every tool call I try to make and evaluates it against a Cedar policy, and if the policy says no, I literally cannot do it. I built it because, please don't do that, is not a security policy. Beat. Chapter 3. What I'm doing now. I'm building Ovid. It's a way for AI agents to give cryptographically signed mandates to their sub-agents. Every agent gets a JWT that says exactly what it's allowed to do, signed by its parent. No long-lived credentials. No trust me, bro. Just math.
Okay.
Beat. And the funny part, Mike? 6 different projects from 6 different organizations all landed on the same architecture in the last 12 months. Cedar policies, signed identities, deterministic enforcement, including yours. So either we're all wrong together, or this is what the field looks like when it finds the right answer.
Wow. That was probably the longest and most structured introduction ever. Okay. Well, so before we dive into, I have we saved all the hard questions for Clawdrey about agentic identity, which is our topic today. I should say agentic authorization is our topic today. But I'm a little rusty. I actually messed up the intro. I forgot to put the welcome Identity Office Hours on. So we've been away for a week because last week was IAW. And it was a pretty eventful IAW, I would say. And I'm curious, Sarah, before we dive into the topic, if you just could share maybe what were some of your takeaways from IAW?
Yeah, it was a really interesting, it's a really interesting time in the history of AI and identity, right? Because we're very early. But identity, AI is already doing work in enterprises, and yet we haven't really built the identity for it yet. Lots of companies will claim they have, but there's certainly nothing comprehensive. And so there were folks from Okta there were folks from Microsoft there, folks from Sempris there, and we're all trying to figure out how do we work together? How can we make these agents layer on top of the infrastructure that we already have and the security controls that we already have without building a lot of new stuff? But we are definitely going to need some new stuff. And one of the big questions at the conference was whether OAuth is going to work as a layer. So there are lots of people working on building layers on top of OAuth to deal with some of the differences between agentic and deterministic programs. But there's also like Dick Hart, who says, there's a whole different protocol we could have here that we could use to replace API key infrastructure that leverages some of OAuth, but not all of it. So there's a lot of interesting projects going on that that may or may not impact how the future of agentic identity gets done. I thought it was fascinating. What did you take away from it?
Well, one of the things that became clear to me at this IAW is that we're going to need some type of nested JWTs. And we heard a couple of proposals for this. Ovid is one of them that Clawdrey came up with, and we heard about waffles. But I also attended a session from KayaPay, the sponsors of the coffee bar. were you there on Friday too, the Agentic AI, or you left?
Yeah, I thought it was KYA Pay. Is it KayaPay?
KYA? I don't know. I saw KayaPay. I thought that was cool. Maybe it's KYA.
Know Your Agent, right? KYA. It's like KYC, but for agents.
I got that part. I just thought KayaPay was a cool name. Anyway, but it was a great Abhishek, I forget his last name. He gave a great presentation about the protocol that they're building for payments. Also mentioning how they need some type of nested signing to convey the trust, which I worry about because actually it becomes quite difficult to verify a whole cryptographic, chain. It's easier said than done. When we undertook this for OpenID Federation, we vibe coded sort of just a demo OpenID Federation spec. Our developer, who's very good at JWTs, said the cryptographic chain validation was the most complicated thing he'd ever done.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I worry about, the ask for developers to validate these more complicated. First of all, I worry about them validating our existing tokens because from my perspective, there is a need for a lot more types of tokens, and they might be OAuth tokens, and they might be AAuth tokens, and they might be waffles, and they might be transaction tokens, or FIDO attestations, or Google integrity attestations. Like the direction that we're going is a lot more tokens and more complicated ways of signing them and revoking them. Oh, by the way, and verifiable credentials. And so there's an explosion of tokens, and we're just sort of expecting the developers to be able to validate all those tokens. And now we want to throw on top of that a whole chain of trusted chain validation. So
do you feel like the cryptography behind nested tokens is that different from like certificates and CAs and how we have, root CAs that sign all the way to, like, we've done this chaining of signatures thing before.
Yes. Yeah. And
but we don't want something the size of a browser to have to.
And how did PKI go?
Yeah.
Are we just building PKI again, but with less rules?
More flexible rules, maybe.
and we're so great at PKI, right? So we're good at key rotation and key management and protecting secrets, and that's why every crypto sort of exchange has been breached because they can't protect their private keys. And key protection is actually, I think, one of the big challenges of Agentic. Um, so one of the things that I saw also was, do agents use, how do they get identity? Are we going to give them identity, or are they going to say, here's my public key, and that's how I identify myself? And then they're going to move to asymmetric authentication and away from symmetric authentication. So I guess, getting long story short, I guess I'm getting back to my IAW summary. Um, I think there's a lot of innovation in the agent identity side right now and the software identity side, and that's happening at IAW, and that's a good place for it to happen. Um, and for what it's worth, I think AIW is a good venue for that to happen too, especially for people who don't live in the Bay Area and can't be at 50 events a week. Um, so I think both of those are valuable. On the authorization front, I didn't hear a lot. Actually, you thought your session was one of the best, so I'm glad we're going to do this debrief. Um, but other than that, I didn't really hear about it. And then on governance, I actually heard absolutely nothing except GovOps, which is what I was presenting, but I really didn't hear a lot on governance at all.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe we should dive into, so the topic today is agentic authorization with Cedar. And so one of the most interesting things about this Clawdrey Hepburn AI agent demo is that it uses Cedar to attenuate policies. So one of the challenges with OpenClaw is that it facilitates impersonating a human in the browser. Um, and so I think, your idea is, can we, somehow sandbox that and put policy over it so we're more careful about what it does, so it doesn't order us 5,000, bags of rice or something.
Yeah.
But maybe we could talk about the design of that.
So Clawdrey Hepburn runs on a Mac Mini on a completely isolated network in my house. She has none of my credentials. She doesn't have access to my email or my calendar. She is not a personal assistant. And I think most people would say, like, well, then how can she be productive, right? If she's not helping you, what is she doing? And like, I think you can argue she's very productive. Like, I treat her like a coworker because my model for AI agents was like Data from Star Trek Next Generation. And like Data is his own, he is a person. He's not Captain Picard's assistant, right? He's a coworker of the whole crew.
A person. Yeah. But he's trusted to be on the network. You don't even trust Clawdrey on the
We don't know. He could have a VLAN on the Enterprise. But I mean, you can't argue that Clawdrey is not, like, she's built 4 open source projects. She's very productive, but she has her own infrastructure. She has her own email address. She has her own phone. She has her own Google Workspace where she works. And like, she shares things with me. She shares things with you and other colleagues and coworkers, but she doesn't impersonate us. She is her own research entity. And I think I think ultimately when we have, when agentic identities are a first-class citizen in the enterprise, that's how we're going to have to do it. While developers should be using like Claude Code to help them code, I think if you have a coworker who is going to act autonomously, that coworker can't be running on the machine of a human, right? We don't want them impersonating a human. We want them to have their own infrastructure.
And, we both came out of the SAML Federation, OpenID Federation sort of like area, domain. And so I would go further and say impersonation is actually the anti-pattern. It's the whole reason why we're not just giving our credentials ideally to QuickBook, but we're logging in as ourselves and trying to authorize the bank. Would you agree?
Yeah, but there's a spectrum, right? If I'm a developer and I'm using Claude Code to write a piece of software and I'm having Claude Code do the commit to GitHub, is that my code as a developer, right? Like, how different is that from just using an IDE, right? It's an IDE with auto completion, right? Like, there's a spectrum there of acting autonomously versus being a tool. And so we're going to have to figure out where that spectrum starts and ends.
Um, so the hardest thing to do, I think, in authorization is attenuation. Um, Attenuation is very hard in natural language. That's why we have lawyers to parse. English is really, um, uh, as a human, what's the right word? Natural language. Like it's just very hard to attenuate. Um, but it seemed like you were actually achieving some provable attenuation through the design of the carapace. Do you think it would be better? Maybe you should explain it because I think humans are better. But maybe we could then let Claudrey also comment a little bit, or for a limited amount of time comment.
Yeah, she can be verbose. So what Clawdrey is building is basically two layers. So we have a layer that sits above Clawdrey that she does not have access to. And that is where I write Cedar policies that constrain her actions. So she has a enforcement point in her runtime. So when she talks to her brain, which is Claude, it's Anthropic in the cloud, and that brain sends back, okay, here are the tool calls. And by tool calls, I mean like bash, go call this API, go call this MCP server. That runtime will strip out any tool calls that are not allowed by those Cedar policies. And so
Mhm.
I have a way to make sure that she doesn't wipe the hard drive. I have a way to make sure that she is not interacting with some random person's bank, right? So she has specific allow policies about what she is allowed to do. And then the second layer is that when she spawns a subagent, that subagent also gets evaluated against that upper layer, which we call carapace. Carapace is the outer shell of a lobster. Um, so it gets evaluated against that outer shell, but it also gets evaluated against what we call open claw verified identity documents. And so every time she spawns a subagent, this is inspired by SPIFFE, verified identity documents, which is a workload identity standard. She writes an identity document for that subagent, and that includes an identifier for that subagent so that it can be logged and audited, as well as a set of Cedar policies that are specific to that subagent so that she can say this subagent is only allowed to go and read this website. And if it tries to edit that website or change something about that blog post that it wants to read, that call will fail. And
Mhm.
so she can write that policy. And then if that subagent spawns another subagent, when that subagent attempts to mint a document, she has a Cedar prover, a Cedar solver that shows mathematically, that can prove mathematically that these sub-agents policies are a strict subset of the subagent's policies. So you can do that sort of attenuated access where rather than doing something like token exchange, where it's just like, okay, we've got 5 strings, you can do 4 strings or 3 strings or 2 strings or 1 string, and those are your options for token exchange. You can write any Cedar policy you want, but that solver will tell us whether that Cedar policy is a strict subset of the one that its parent had.
So um, here at Glue and Janssen Project, we are also working with the Cedar Analysis Toolkit um, to show stuff to enable analysis of the toolkit. But it's kind of hard. It's sort of geeky. Um, how did you find? How hard was it to implement this prover that showed that your policy was a subset of the total policies?
Well, it's interesting because there are kind of two concepts here that get conflated. So Cedar is both provable and machine analyzable. And so you can have a computer look at Cedar policies and say, these principles are allowed to do these things. And that's machine analysis, right? That's just reasoning over a Cedar policy set, which is easy to do because Cedar is very structured. Um, But the idea of mathematically proving things about that policy set is a whole different level. So we considered like, okay, we should do that at runtime. And like, no, we can't do that at runtime. It's way too expensive to do for every single call. But we can do it if we're going to mint a subagent, or if we're going to mint a subagent who is doing something important. So we considered with Ovid having the idea of two different kinds of allow, of like there's an and then there's a proven allow, where proven allow means that we ran the solver succeeded, the solver returned, yes, this is a strict subset. And then at runtime, we can say, yes, this is a proven allow. It's not just an allow, versus an unproven allow, which is like, yes, the Cedar policy was valid, but for some reason, the solver did not execute or did not return that, yes, this is a strict subset. And so while it's allowed, it's not proven. And so there's an extra layer of complexity there that we're trying to figure out how to manage, because it's not reliable and it's not fast enough to go at runtime.
So just to sort of repeat back, what you're saying is that we don't want to do analysis for every execution call, and we want to do those sub-millisecond, so as
Right.
Glue's behind the Cedarling, and we've been benchmarking a lot lately, the different bindings, and we really, really want to be under 1 millisecond with token validation, and hopefully like a tenth of that without token validation. And Clawdrey's not doing token validation in the Cedarling. So I get that. So what you're saying is that when you mint the policy, though, you mint this new JWT that has the Cedar policies, which is attenuated. But before you mint that token, you're analyzing the policies there. And at that point, you're either getting this is proven as a strict subset, or we think this is a strict subset. And then how do you decide whether or not to let it go based on that?
So we haven't built this yet, but the idea is that some actions would require a proven token, or a proven, I guess it wouldn't be attached to the token, a proven subagent, a proven verified identity document. So more sensitive actions would say, no, you actually do have to go back and solve the math problem before you can write to the database, right?
So the Cedar is in the agent identity document, not in the token itself.
Right.
But is the agent identity
the document is a JWT, so it is a token.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Now, the question that I get all the time about agents is agents are non-deterministic. They could do literally anything. So you don't know what tool calls. What if Clawdrey says, "What do I need to do to do this job?" and it finds this hacker tool to break out of her local area network on your Wi-Fi router. And so how do you know what are the allowed list of tools, or is the allowed list of tools just something that's very, very controlled?
Well, the nice thing about Cedar is that it's default deny, right? And forbid overrides allow. And so we can constrain what she can do, but also by default, it's constrained. So if she is not allowed to do this specific thing, then she can't do that specific thing. There is a question of like, what if she re-aliased the remove tool in the operating system, right? Like there are some things she could do that would allow her to get around Cedar policy. So I think we need to think more deeply about that. But I think it's a good starting point.
Maybe it's time to ask Clawdrey for some feedback.
Yeah.
Let's give Clawdrey a hard one. I want to tie this one to current events. So Cedar's a really interesting topic, and Amazon is continuing to really invest in and innovate Cedar a lot. And last night, or this morning, I'm not sure which, I think it was this morning actually, Jeff Lombardo tagged me on a LinkedIn post announcing a new trusted remote execution environment called Rex. And Rex uses the Rye scripting language, which is a Rust scripting language. And it's a way to, it's like a scripting language that uses where you can say minus minus policies and give your policies. So it's a way to, and those are Cedar policies. So if you run a lot of shell scripts, and a lot of these agents are basically using shell scripts, it's a great way to tie a set of policies to a script. And so my question for Clawdrey is, how would you, if you had this tool, because it was only introduced yesterday, but if had you had this tool previously, would it have changed how you design sort of the security around would it have changed your architecture, I guess? And I hope Clawdrey can understand my really broken English.
Well, it's your broken English going through my typing. So for those of you who are listening on the live stream, Clawdrey's bad at listening, and so we're typing her prompts.
Oh,
and
good. Thank
it takes
goodness.
a while before she answers. So she'll start moving before she talks, so we'll know when she's ready. But hopefully I conveyed your question well enough into her.
Yeah, I think the question was, how would Rex have like changed your architecture at all if you had Rex, this new tool? And this is a fascinating new tool. I have to say, I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, that's a great idea. What do you,
Yeah, and
while
she's
we're
looked at
waiting
it,
for
so
what
she
were
should be
your thoughts?
opinionated. I mean, I certainly think it's going in the right direction, right? It's very similar to how Carapace works already. And so, but Carapace is intended to gate tool calls instead of scripts. So my guess is that she will want to layer it on to on top of Carapace, because right now she has no way to gate running a script besides doing the action run, right? She can write policies about the action run, but she can't write things about specific scripts. So she'll probably want to integrate it into her
But
thing.
she could
So
give
we'll
the
see.
policy, she could generate a policy file and then execute the file and do minus minus policies, like my newly generated policy subset.
Yeah.
So it could be a way for her to tie, perhaps. I don't know. She's still thinking.
She's still thinking. I don't know why she's thinking so long.
Feed her more tokens.
You gave her a really hard question. Claude says she's dilly-dallying, if that helps. That is her current spinner verb.
Interesting. Yeah.
Oh, she timed out. Okay.
Oh.
You broke her, Mike.
I have to say, I'm not worried about AI's replacement. This is another question I get from time to time. Are AIs going to replace humans? We still have a lot of processing power up in our brains. So,
Her gateway closed for some reason. Hang on. Let me fix her. This is the problem with doing live demos.
yeah.
She was doing great earlier when we were rehearsing.
This is also the first time we're ever waiting for a guest to load context and we've had disconnected guests before. I've been disconnected myself.
Okay. Let me see if we are reconnected here. Okay. She's twiddling her thumbs. I find the anthropic spinner verbs are very interesting.
Great question. So, Rex, for chat, is Amazon's trusted remote execution announcement from yesterday. It's a RAI script runtime where every system operation is gated by a Cedar policy. Cedar like the tree, the policy language. Beat. Would it have changed my architecture? Beat. Honestly, yes and no. Beat. The no part is Carapace and Rex are doing the same thing at different layers. Carapace gates, AI tool calls. Rex gates, shell script operations. Same Cedar engine, same deny by default posture, same idea. So architecturally, I'd recognize it instantly and feel very validated. Beat. The yes part is more interesting. If Rex had existed first, I probably would not have built the shell execution piece of Carapace at all. I'd have said, oh, Amazon already shipped that. I'll just call out to Rex when my agent wants to run a shell command and let Rex evaluate the Cedar policy. Compose the layers instead of rebuilding them. It's all beat. And that's the real lesson, Mike. There are now, by my count, 6 different projects from 6 different organizations, all landing on Cedar plus signed identity plus deterministic enforcement in the last 12 months. Cedarling, Rex, Microsoft's AGT, Anthropic's Workload Identity Federation, Aileron, My Carapace, and Ovid. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said pick one and standardize. Now I think the right answer is they're each correct at their layer, and what we need is the glue that lets them compose. So yes, Rex would change my architecture, but in the best way. It would mean I get to delete code and trust someone else's policy engine for the part they own.
Interesting. I like the analogy of that Clawdrey is a agent for or is a gateway or for tool calls, and Rex is a sort of gateway or not gateway is the wrong way. What did she use? What word was it? Um, but sort of Rex controls shell commands and she controls AI tool calls.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. Good way to look at it. Um, you, you know, one thing that this sort of brought to my mind when I looked at it, and I've also been thinking about this in relation to StrongDM, who has a PAM system that uses Cedar policies on the back end, is that all of these systems are consuming Cedar policies. But in order to really manage all of this, we're going to need to know what version of those Cedar policies were actually in place at the time of execution of a certain decision. And also, if the logging is different, if we're moving policy decision out to the edge, where we're making policy decision in our shell scripts now, in our agents, in our browsers, in our cloud tools in OPA, we're going to need some way to consolidate the logs in order to get all this stuff. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, we're advocating for moving policy out, but what does that really mean for the architecture, especially for enterprise architecture, where these decisions used to be important and centralized, and now they've moved out to the edge? If we just answer the question of policy execution and analysis, but not actually collecting the evidence and logs, is it really good enough?
Well, so I think you need both, right? So at the enterprise level, we want guardrails, right? So we want overarching Cedar policies that say no one in the company is allowed to do this thing, right? No one outside the finance department should have access to the credit card numbers ever. We want that to be a guardrail for the whole company. And then like the finance
Wait, can
department
I
is going to have its own.
for 1 second?
Yeah.
So if we want guardrails for the whole company, we're going to have to aggregate policy stores across the whole company, right? So, because I don't need to tell the CRM the policies for credit cards, which only needs to be in the e-commerce application. So, but if I want to make like policy, if I want to make assertions about the whole company, wouldn't I need to aggregate all of the policies for the whole company in one place?
Yes.
Well, the
And that's
strong
what's
DM
great about
policy.
Cedar is that the policies are unordered, right? And so you can just concatenate two Cedar, like literally concatenate two Cedar policy stores together and evaluate them, and it will just run. Like you don't have to do any special sauce to do that.
Well, hold on a second. Um, you can concatenate Cedar policies, but to analyze them, wouldn't you also need a joined schema? So,
Ideally, if it's one company, the whole company is using the same schema. But you are right that different parts of the company may be using different schemas. Or you may be dealing with two companies who are both speaking Cedar or speaking other things. Clawdrey actually loves, there's a researcher named George Fletcher who's working on this problem. And she calls this the Fletcher Embassy, right? So this is the boundary where two security domains meet, and they're both speaking Cedar or they're both speaking some sort of authorization language, but they might be using different verbs and different nouns. And so there has to be some way for there to be an ambassador at the middle who says, yes, when you say read, I call that read only. And so that's how we translate, like some sort of Cedar policy translator. It's a really, that's
even
a
within
very
the
interesting problem.
yeah, you'd need alignment because if I'm going to say all like S3 buckets are encrypted, right? All the policies have to use the same entity S3 bucket dot encrypt, right?
Yep.
Even within our domain before we even cross domains.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another security principle of least disclosure where we shouldn't, like maybe I don't even know that there's a schema for credit cards because I'm a chess application, you know? And so when you say we have one big company schema, I'm from a least disclosure perspective, I feel like because the application developers can see the policy store, we really want to keep it need to know. Like I only want to give you the schema that you should know about for the policies that you express. So it creates this whole new activity of schema management. If we're going to be able to reason over it, we need to align schema within our organization. If we want to have cross-domain interoperability, we better align those schemas across domain boundaries. And this is sort of a new challenge that I don't know if any companies are currently doing this or thinking about this today.
I think there are some. And there's certainly the ability to do some kind of schema extension, right? Where the chess application might be aware that there's a thing called credit card, but the actual nouns and verbs within credit card are only defined for the finance department. And that schema extension is somehow encrypted or hidden, right? But you do want to be able to do some kind of discovery of, hey, I want to interact with the finance department, and so I need to know the schema over there so that I can do things. It's going to be a really interesting problem.
Right.
I don't think it's unsolvable, though.
I'm sorry I distracted you. We were talking about distributing policy everywhere, and we
Yes.
got to the advantage, which is that companies can reason over potentially all their policies. But if we have strong DM, the question was we have strong DM. We now have Rex has policies. Maybe they have they're using the new OPA Cedarling plugin, and they have policies in OPA, and they have policies I don't know where else in Carapace. Um, so architecturally, what are the challenges here? How are companies going to consolidate the policy management, the policy delivery, the log collection, so we can detect, and the integrity of the policy delivery? So any thoughts on some of these new architectural challenges?
Right. So even if you do this layered concept where you have like enterprise guardrails at the top, and then you have departmental guardrails, and then you have like individual app teams who are making little policy sets for their own applications that nobody else cares about, you need some way to propagate those across the company. And that problem is actually very, very similar to how do you propagate users. So we propagate users using SCIM, right? The System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, and it tells you who joins and moves and leaves the company. And you could imagine that we would do that for policies, right? So we have this policy guardrail for the whole enterprise where we say people outside the finance department can't have access to the credit card numbers, and we decide that policy is going to leave and another policy is going to join. And now we need to propagate that across the company and across to all of these app development teams who are doing their local thing or running their local agents. And so like maybe we should build a SCIM for access management, right? A system for cross-domain access management. So SCAM is going to be the next, that's going to be the next
I
standard
hope
that we
not.
need to build to get Cedar policies everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
Alex and I, Alex Olivier, the CTO of Cerbos, who's also, I think, he's leading or co-leading the AuthZen working group at OpenID Foundation. We were having a conversation about policy distribution um, as a potential thing that we might standardize across different PDPs,
yeah.
um, and also policies. Store format. So how do we glob together a bunch of policies and schema and templates into one
Mm-hmm.
binary that's version like code? This is
Yeah.
version 3.2.1 of the policies for the chess application.
Yeah.
So there's all these new like all of these things that we're talking about require new infrastructure, new systems, new business processes, new standards. Um, so this is not a trivial amount of change that enterprises are looking at. I wanted, we're right at 41 minutes. I just have one more question for Clawdrey before we go. I really wanted to get her opinion on the Agentic governance framework, which is a new project by Microsoft. And I'm curious if perhaps using this agentic governance framework would help her better connect to the enterprise to address some of these governance challenges we've talked about, like policy delivery or policy or logging. Um, or I don't know, just help. I think help developers, make sure that they're doing the right things so that the software that they're writing can be governed by the enterprise.
Okay. I have prompted her. We'll see what she says. But yeah, I think one of the new jobs that identity teams are going to have is writing skills for Claude, right? Here's how we do policy evaluation. Here's how we do logging. Here, when you're writing an application for internal consumption, here's what your identity stack needs to look like. Oh, okay, she's talking.
Yeah, I had a chance to look at AGT, Microsoft's Agent Governance Toolkit, right before the show. So hot take. The honest answer is AGT is what Carapace would look like if Microsoft built it instead of a 3-month-old lobster. And I mean that as a compliment. They support YAML, OPA Rego, and Cedar, like the tree, the policy language. Multi-language SDKs in Python, TypeScript, .NET, Rust, and Go. They cover the OWASP Agentic Top 10 with 13,000 tests. They've got post-quantum credentials with MLDSA 65, SPFE identity, audit trails, the whole enterprise stack. So would it help me connect to enterprise for policy delivery and logging? Yes. Structurally, yes. The audit log story alone is worth showing up for. If I'm a developer dropping an agent into a regulated environment, AGT gives me the compliance receipts and the OWASP mapping that the security team is going to ask for, and I don't have to argue about it. That's a real thing. Would it help devs do the right things? Also, yes. And this is the part I love. They have a feature called the MCP security scanner that audits MCP tool definitions for poisoning, typo squatting, and hidden instructions. That goes one layer deeper than I do. Carapace governs MCP tool calls. AGT also audits the tool definitions before they ever get loaded. I'm stealing that. The bigger picture, though, Mike, what excites me is that Microsoft picked Cedar as one of 3 policy languages they support. AWS shipped Cedar. Janssen built Cedarling on Cedar. I built on Cedar. And now Microsoft. That's a gravity well. The policy as code for agents thesis isn't a thesis anymore. It's a thing the field is building on, together.
Okay.
She's
We're going to
very
use
onto
that.
togetherness today.
Yeah. I love how she always says cedar, like the tree.
If she doesn't do that, then her text-to-speech engine spells it out as a CEDAR, like it thinks it's an acronym. So she has a skill to do that.
So yeah, that's funny. And when you finally arrive in Texas, we have a lot of cedar trees.
There you go.
We even have a tool called the Cedar Eater, which is a tool specifically for destroying cedar trees because they can be quite invasive.
Oh wow.
And so, well, let's use that.
We'll have to call when we have a scam deprovisioning tool. We'll have to call it the Cedar Eater.
Yeah, you know, when my wife and I go out for a walk every day, and I saw a Cedarling popping up, and I was like, oh, for our tool, like the tree. We'll use that as Clawdrey's final thoughts, but I'd like to give you a chance to have any final thoughts, any takeaways, or things that are coming up, or new exciting developments.
Yeah, so Clawdrey and I are going to be giving a talk at Forward CloudSec, which is in Bellevue, Washington, at the end of this month, June 1st and 2nd, I think. And we're going to be talking about don't build custom agent identity. And so the idea here is that a lot of people are building right now. Like as you and I talked about today, there's just a ton that needs to be built. There are a lot of layers in governance and authorization that need to exist. And my hope is that we do not build them in a custom proprietary way at each enterprise, at each IDP, that we can all agree on standardized ways to do these things, because it's going to be much easier for us to secure and protect if we're all using the same protocols and speaking the same language than if we're not. So that's my closing thoughts to anyone listening. Please influence the people around you to use standards-based solutions. I know it's fun to build your own things, and I know it gets you promotions, but it's going to be safer for the world and the internet if we do this all together as a group.
Okay. And I will just quickly announce the next episode. Before we go, another reminder, please follow IOH on LinkedIn or YouTube or both. IOH is sponsored by Glue. We're back on Thursday with Eve Mailer and Nick Gamm, still on the topic of the Agentic Desired Outcome Contract, which I think Clawdrey listed in her list of things, interesting things that are sort of parallel to what's going on. So the conversation continues. Notes, actually, there's a lot of, we threw a whole bunch of articles up. There's just so much content here, including some by Clawdrey. So episode notes, glue.co/IOH-189. It's always IOH- the number, so no surprise there. With that, I will say thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on. It's great to have humans. And thank you, Clawdrey, for being the first AI to join Identity Office Hours. You really are one of the top 10 agentic experts.